Okay, we're recording. Hello, my name is Cindy Jarvis, founder of the U equals Me Foundation. U equals Me crosses all races, religions, cultures, and genders with its message globally. It's the realization of our return to our unity, our divinity by objecting to intolerance and indifferences, even if it's even small amounts of kindness in our own little communities and little towns. It's making a huge difference all around the world. And it's about well being and our journey back to well being. Today, we have the pleasure of learning more about well being through sacred geometry with Quentin Carpenter. Welcome, Quentin.
Hi there, Cindy. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. Quentin resides in Sussex, England.
Yes, that's right.
It's
Down
beautiful.
by
And
the south coast.
Sussex, I was looking on the computer yesterday, it's known for its strong traditions of bonfire celebrations.
That's right. Yeah,
And
we were literally at one at the weekend.
yes, that's what you said. And it's also a proud musical heritage. Sussex in the first half of the 20th century was a major center for modernism and saw many radical artists and writers move to the seaside towns and countryside. That is so cool.
Yeah, there's a very famous gallery called the Delaware Pavilion in Bexhill, which is just down the road from us, which is a 1920s Art Deco building. Very iconic.
It's amazing. I never knew that. I never knew that about Sussex. Well,
Mm.
then you're right at home in your uh, artwork. So Quentin is
Absolutely, yeah.
Quentin's an artist, photographer, digital creator, living and working in East Sussex, England. Quentin has a master's degree uh, in the fine arts from University of Brighton.
That's right, yeah. I've been studying like all my life with art. I've also been teaching art and photography for the last 20 years.
That's
And I'm
wonderful.
recently retired.
Yes, and you've been serving as department heads of your school and um,
Yeah,
teaching for
that's right.
quite a while. That's really wonderful. And your original art form was photography or painting,
That's right.
rather. Painting.
Yeah, I started with painting, and then when digital photography started evolving a long, long time ago, like 20 odd years ago now, I was really fascinated by how you could capture light through the digital media. And we used to have one of those Sony ones with the compact discs that you put in. I don't know
Uh-huh.
if you remember those ones back then.
Of course.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough in 1999 to go to Cornwall and see the solar eclipse that was in England.
Hmm.
There's a whole piece about that with taking digital photographs through the clouds as the sun slowly disappeared behind the moon.
Wow.
That was amazing. And I understand recently in America you just had an eclipse,
We
haven't you?
just did. We just did
Did you
recently.
manage to catch it?
I did actually. I did. I didn't photograph it, but it was pretty amazing. I did. I was able to see it, and it was, I think, in like mid-morning at the
Okay.
time of the eclipse, and it was somewhat clear, so I was able to see it. That's just
Excellent.
amazing.
Mm. I have
Um,
a feeling that the eclipses have some sort of part to play in a lot of the sacred geometry and how the sort of image of the circle has that mystique.
yeah, let's hear about it because
Yeah. So
everything's interconnected as I
mm,
understand it.
yeah, the way I interpreted it is obviously at the total eclipse you have the moon covering the sun, but it doesn't completely block out all of the sun. You get that aura, the bit that goes around it. And I think that holds special significance to a lot of people in the ancient times.
Hmm.
And I think to be able to predict an eclipse for some of the cultures, I think is quite a huge thing. Because if you didn't know what was happening, you'd be freaking out. If you just the world turned black,
Right,
etc.
right. Well, sacred geometry, I think, is really interesting because it is sort of an ancient study. I mean, if we go
Mm,
back to Plato and Pythagoras and Leonardo da Vinci and their observations in geometry, um, it's really quite ancient.
absolutely, yeah. And the term geometry itself, I was doing my research before
Yeah.
this interview, and it actually comes from the measure of the earth. The actual term and the word is all about measuring the earth. And from what I understand, is in ancient Egypt, where the river Nile would flow, every year it would flood, as you're probably aware, which would make the Nile Delta very fertile ground because it would flood. But every year afterwards, they'd have to remark out the land so they know where to plant their crops, etc. And so that's sort of where the measure of the earth and that kind of geometry came from.
Wow, that's interesting. Geo.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about sacred geometry. Let's talk about, for those people, like myself, I don't really know what it is, but I know that it's there. I know that it exists in shapes. So what is it exactly? What is sacred
I think
geometry?
a lot of people use mandalas, and it's a way of focusing their mind. So having that pattern, mainly quite often as a circle, that you then look at and you'll start to think your own thoughts to do with. And lots of different cultures have different interpretations of the same thing. Like, for example, in China, in the yin yang, you may be familiar with, and the Shri Yantra, and lots of other cultures have these different symbols. And what I'm fascinated about is how they all like interconnect, and it creates that sort of oneness overall.
Mm-hmm.
And I've
It
been
is.
fascinated.
I think
And
it's absolutely fascinating, and I think it was uh, Plato or Pythagoras that felt that the sacred geometry was actually the building blocks to the universe.
mm,
But which
yeah, a lot of people.
I think it's really interesting, because if you look at inside of our bodies and our cellular repetitions, it's exactly that.
Yeah,
Ex-
and a lot of this is the idea of like cells dividing. So a cell will divide, and if you look at like microscopic photographs of cells that are dividing, they form the same kind of patterns as the flower of life, the seed of life, and the tree of life, etc. It all generates from the same source and then builds outwards. So I've
mm-hmm.
been really fascinated in exploring that in my artwork.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about some of the shapes, Quentin. Let's
Mm.
That you have prepared for us. Let's see what we're looking at here. I do
So
know. I'm
the,
sorry.
the
Go ahead.
first shape that I wanted to introduce is the hardest to pronounce. It's the Visica Pieces, which is basically two interlocking circles. And the shape in the middle of those two interlocking circles creates this sort of like an oval shape, but like more of a point, more like an ellipse. And that's been linked a lot with the ancient Christian symbol of the fish that they used to represent
Mm-hmm.
Jesus with.
Mm. Yes,
And
yes, I
a
love
lot of
that.
ancient Christian art will have that shape within it, mainly normally around sort of images of Jesus, etc. And it comes from the two interlocking circles and how they overlap.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that, you've got the triquestra, which is adding a third circle to create like essentially like a tripod shape. So you've got like all like the leaves of like a clover. And from that, lots of people think that it embodies the Holy Trinity. And
Yeah.
you've got it in Celtic traditions, you've got it all over the world, and you've got it in like the sort of triple yin yang, but and like in Korea, and they have that as well. So you've got the seed of life, which is taking those three circles and adding another three, so you end up with six circles and a center circle, which creates seven circles. And some people believe that that represents the 7 days of creation, like the Bible story about Genesis.
Right. Oh,
So
the
you have
seven candles. Yes.
6 around the edge, and then the seventh is in the middle, which is the day of rest, and then it all unifies. And if you take that shape and then expand out on that, you create the flower of life, which is the most iconic, I think, of all sacred geometry. That is
Is that what we're looking at right behind you, Quentin? Is that
right
the?
behind me here, this one here.
Yeah.
So this is the flower of life.
Yep.
And it
It's
doesn't stop
amazing.
there. If you keep expanding out from that,
Yeah.
you get to a thing called the fruit of life, which you can then, it starts getting more and more complicated, but you kind of like fade out some of the circles, and then you add some straight lines, and you end up with a thing called Metatron's cube. And
Uh-huh.
Metatron is this famous angel back in the day who was the idea that he created the universe. It was him that sort of drew out the blueprints,
Uh-huh.
sort of like God's right hand, etc., etc. And from the Metatron's cube, which is a series of geometric lines and triangles and hexagons, you can then create the platonic solids by filling in some of the lines and the shapes. And the platonic solids are the five building blocks of all of everything, if you are familiar with those. And I'll see if I get them in the right order. So you have the tetrahedron, which represents fire, and that's basically like a four-sided pyramid. You've got the cube, which is representative of earth and the ground, etc. You've got the octahedron, which has got 8 equilateral triangle faces, and it represents air. You've got the dodecahedron, which is 12 regular pentagons, and that symbolizes the universe. And inside that, you've got the isosahedron, which is always a hard to pronounce,
Mm-hmm.
which has 20 equilateral triangle faces, and it represents water. And they are the only shapes that have equal amounts of sides, symmetries, angles, etc. And Plato discovered them way, way back in ancient Greece, and they have been fascinating people ever since.
I
There was
think, yeah.
mm,
Go ahead.
an astronomer,
Yeah.
Kepler, back in the 14 or 1500s, who was convinced that the solar system was made up out of the platonic solids, and he created this massive model that has stuck with me all my life, where they were sort of interlocked, and inside each shape created a gap that the planets would revolve around the sun in, etc., etc. And it's quite
Mm-hmm.
revolutionary. It's been proved wrong, obviously, with the ellipses of the planetary paths, but at the time it was really, really good news.
It's amazing some of the discovery, the observations of the plutonic solids, and I had to look up plutonic solid. I didn't know what it was, but apparently
Mm.
it's just like you said, equal sides with the vertex, equal faces in the shape, a 3D dimensional shape.
Yeah, a lot of people, if they ever play board games, will probably be familiar with the shapes because they are the dice that you use in lots of board games. If you ever use
Yeah,
different style of dice, because they are equal shapes, they're the only ones you can get.
that's
It's
interesting.
really
That's interesting, Quentin, that there are only 5,
mm,
I think.
yeah,
And
and that's why
and
they think they tie in with the elements so beautifully. You've
yeah,
got like the 4 main elements.
and you might remember this. There was a new potential, not yet classified as
Mm,
a platonic solid called the buckyball,
yeah,
and it looks like a soccer ball. But it was discovered in 1985. I have it listed here by scientists Robert Curl, Harold Kroto, and Richard Smalley, and they were awarded a Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1986 for this work.
mm.
That's pretty interesting.
It is incredible that nowadays, you find these advancements of the technology, etc. It's really, really fascinating.
Yeah,
And I believe there's a big sculpture of it in America somewhere, isn't there?
in San Francisco at the front of the Exploratorium at Pier
Mm,
15 in San Francisco. There is this buckyball,
mm,
as it's called. So it's an
mm.
interesting, a new shape to fascinate all of us science wannabes.
Yeah, definitely.
So what I think is so interesting about sacred geometry, it's not so much that its mathematical properties, but also the power that it takes with it into artwork. That
Mm.
to me
Oh,
is, yeah, that to me is really um, fascinating when you can break down famous paintings that
Oh,
include
absolutely.
some of the
And then,
sacred geometry.
yeah, like artists like Leonardo da Vinci, is one of the famous examples, and you can see how one of his most famous works, the Vitruvian Man, the guy with his
Yes.
arms out in the circle in the square, that has been shown to correlate almost perfectly with the flower of life,
Yeah.
and how the sort of proportions within the flower of life and the proportions within his drawing of a man, which is our proportions, so we are
Right.
all proportionally all interlocked. And I've followed people on the internet that have researched about how all the different geometric shapes within the flower of life can be correlated out into equations, and how
Yeah.
that all that knowledge, all those different things are all interlocked in just one simple design,
Mm-hmm.
which it just fascinates just to look at and sort of transcend. It's sort of very meditative as you see how the the circles intertwine and overlap and underlap, etc.
Mm-hmm. It's
Quite
interesting.
plant.
It is because it's pi
Mm,
mathematically.
absolutely.
Is that right? It's pi
Yeah,
because it just
it is quite.
keeps
Yeah.
just like the body, just like what we see in nature. And I think sacred geometry is really important because um, I think it, like you said, it has a calming, a meditative when you witness it, like in a sunflower or some of the most famous shapes, like the snail,
Mm.
Fibonacci swirl.
That's right. Yeah, Fibonacci and the Fibonacci spiral. I've been absolutely fascinated with, and the Fibonacci number sequence.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're familiar with how the number system works for Fibonacci,
No, I'm
but
not
basically, if you imagine you start with 0 and you add 1 to it, the next number you're going to get in the sequence is going to be 1, because it's 0 plus 1 is 1. Then if you add the 1 plus the preceding one, you get 2. So you've got 0, 1, 1, 2. And then if you add the 2 to the preceding 1, you get 3. So it goes 1, 1, 2, 3. And then if you add the 3 to the 2, you get 5. And if you add the 5 to the 3, you get 8. The 8 to the 5, you get 13. It builds rapidly from a very small, little, tiny spiral. It starts to expand ever so hugely. And a lot of scientists have looked into how that relates to storms, cloud formations. There's obviously the sunflower seeds, and that's proven that they grow in that cycle. And also the universe itself, like the Milky Way, is on that same sort of spiral pattern. So you take anything, you just add itself to itself, and it just grows and grows and grows. And one of the sort of first animations I did about 3 or 4 years ago, I explored that. It's just sort of similar to what I'm wearing on my t-shirt.
Oh, yes.
Stand up. So you can see how it goes from 1 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 to 8, etc. And it just
Yeah.
builds and builds and builds. And there's even people who are interested in earning, lots of money on the stock market. They use the sort of Fibonacci theory within their stock trading, etc. It's,
Interesting.
it's a fascinating. Fibonacci himself is fascinating.
Uh-huh.
And,
So, who was Fibonacci?
well, he was a guy. I can't get this wrong now, but back in sort of 1500s or 1600s, he was like a trader, and he brought this mass back from where he was traveling and used it within the trade where he was working. I'd have to do
Interesting.
more research. I can't remember off the top of my head
Oh,
all
no,
about
that's
it.
fine. I've known about the name Fibonacci, but I never really connected it to a real person. But that
Mm,
makes sense because um, the um, the Vitruvian man was
mm,
after Greek mathematician Vitruvian.
mm,
So when it I and in that in Leonardo's drawing of the Vitruvian man, you can see the mathematical equations in the drawings. It's really um, it's really a beautiful piece, and it almost looks like he's spinning
mm.
to
Right,
me.
so I just looked it up. He's called Leonardo Fibonacci. Leonardo on the Chequy of Pisa, and he was an Italian, and circa 1240 to 1170 to 1240. And
This is the true. This is
and he wrote basically a book called the Book of Calculations, which is what a lot of his maths came from.
uh-huh.
And he introduced Europe to the sequence of the Fibonacci's. So yeah, he traveled in the Indo-Arab. So he publicized the Indo-Arabic numeric system. So he's obviously in different cultures, maths has been used in different ways since like ancient times, and certain cultures would understand certain properties of numbers other than others. So when he brought it back to Europe, it kind of revolutionized things there. And one of the most famous things with the Fibonacci sequence is the golden proportion, which on the golden rectangle.
Golden ratio, yeah.
So rectangles, especially like we use all the time, we look at rectangles on our phones and TVs, etc. But the proportions, the height of the width of a rectangle, there is one that is perfect. It's the golden rectangle, and it's all to do with the relationship of the numbers, and it's 1.618, and there's like lots of maths behind it. But the Fibonacci spiral is put into rectangles. If you imagine a square 1 centimeter wide next to another square 1 centimeter wide, and then the one next to that is 2 centimeters wide, and you build that around like a snail, you end up with that Fibonacci and the golden rectangle.
Yeah, that's just amazing. It's just amazing that this all of this work was done in the 12th to 14th century.
Yeah,
You know?
and you know, the whole Renaissance was really like in Italy, this huge art movement, and you know, all the famous artists that everyone's really familiar with, they all kind of got this knowledge at the same kind of time, which exploded into the
Yeah.
world, because before, a lot of it had been, you know, lost in the Dark Ages, etc., or you know, since the fall of Rome and all that. You know, I'm not massively familiar with history as such, but once the Renaissance happened, it kind of rekindled all this knowledge and art, and everyone was inspiration, kind of the Gothic cathedrals, all using those proportions and all that kind of huge, great expansion of knowledge, etc. It's fascinating time.
I think it's fascinating too. I know that the Mona Lisa, you know, when you break down the components of the Mona Lisa, you can see layers and layers and layers of sacred geometry on top of that painting, which is what makes it so phenomenal. I mean, that painting is, you know, there's none like it in the world. But even other paintings in that time period, and perhaps even now, new paintings.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying there is right. If you think about Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper and how that was used, you know, the V shape in that, and if you're familiar with Dan Brown's films and the books, and that Da Vinci Code, that sort of people now are kind of unlocking the secret codes possibly in Da Vinci's work, and how it became like a big popular sort of movie franchise and all this sort of huge like wonder and stuff. But behind that, there is still intrinsically inside the paintings, there are these structures that link back all the way to this sort of ancient knowledge and this sort of sacred geometry. And how that's interpreted by, you know, people looking at the work is entirely their viewpoint, etc. But it's like anyone who does any sort of artwork, I'm sure would be familiar with like sketching things out first in pencil and then building up the layers of paint or whichever medium they're using, and sort of build things in layers and having that structure underpinning it at the beginning with those sort of geometric principles. And then when I was teaching, I'd teach the concepts to my students as well. So you're not just putting things randomly on paper, you're kind of positioning things.
Right. I was just going to ask you about that. How you teach that in your classes?
I mean, with photography, the rule of thirds is, again, I'm sure you're familiar with as well, that quite often a beautiful photograph will have the image to one side of the middle. The horizon won't be bang straight up in the middle, it'll be sort of two-thirds down and one-third across. And that all sort of links with the sort of Fibonacci. And you can have that Fibonacci flow within your image
Mm-hmm.
And you'll quite often see that with like landscapes where they position bits of like a tree so it will form that swirl around. So
Mm.
it's always fascinating teaching students about these sort of underpinning things because
Right.
it's all very surface.
Yeah. And also in the reception and receiving, when you're looking at the sacred geometry, it affects people differently. I mean, it does have an effect on
Yeah,
us when we're viewing it in nature, whether we're viewing it in artwork. It does it does have a sense of it carries a sense of, like you said when we first started this conversation, Quentin, this meditative. It's pretty powerful. They're pretty powerful
yeah,
images to be used to heal and quiet the mind as well.
absolutely. I mean, there are cultures around the world, and I believe in India, I don't know the exact cultural name, but where they'll make the mandalas from the sand outside their houses
Mm-hmm.
every Diwali, is it? And they'll get the coloured sand and the coloured rice, and they'll build these beautiful like things for. I mean, there's lots of underlying stuff I don't have the knowledge to really explain, but they're absolutely beautiful,
Hmm.
and they're just literally made out of coloured rice and coloured sand. And then when
Wow.
the festival's over, they just washed away.
Hmm. I'll have to. I'm
You
not
know,
familiar with that. I didn't know that. Um, let's talk about some of the work that you're doing now. Are you teaching now?
no, I'm retired from teaching for last year,
Uh-huh.
and
Oh,
since
good.
retirement, I've been setting up and running my company business, natureflowers.com, which I'm obviously here to plug in one way or another. Which I'm coming from teaching. I'm really interested in getting my message across to sort of wide audience.
Mm-hmm.
So using social media to sort of share the images, and particularly I'm fascinated by transitions animations and how all the shapes intertwine, especially with flowers. So I've been really fascinated on flower photography, which kind of like sparked like having a focal point for your work and having it as the flower and then the sort of center of the flower and how flowers mimic and follow the same kind of Fibonacci patterns that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just since obviously using computers with the way animations are, you can just slow down a transition. It's absolutely fascinating for me.
Well, flowers are fascinating when you look at them. I mean, they're the colors and the patterns and the shapes. They're just striking.
Mm.
So, and you also have a set of note cards that you're producing.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so I've literally been printing out and getting all
I
these
love
sorted out,
those.
but so they're like you could write any message in, etc.
Uh-huh. I
And
love them. Yeah, they're beautiful.
yeah,
They're
so
beautiful.
they're really sweet, and it's finding things. Sort of, I don't want to be just another guy making more products and chucking them out into the world. So I use an ethically sourced company for my printing called Prodigy. So
Mm-hmm.
they're worldwide. They have um, areas in the world that they would get their stuff printed, and then it will ship out within a country rather than having to do everything here and then create a big carbon footprint sending it all over the world. So I've got like customers in America,
Oh,
etc.
great.
So
Yeah,
it's really
great.
nice to have sort of that
So,
local.
so were you always working with sacred geometry in your artwork, or is this something that you just came to a little bit later, or is it a,
Yeah, I mean, since my MA, when I was talking about with the eclipse and taking all the digital photography, I was fascinated by the golden proportion and how that related to art. But I didn't really fully understand sort of sacred geometry of it. So I got into flowers, and then from flowers, it kind of like just evolved naturally, kind of like looking in the internet about flowers, and then the flower of life appeared. And I wasn't really
yeah.
familiar with the flower of life, so I started diving deep into that. And then when it made the link to the Vesica Pisa, which I was familiar with, and how that led into like the seed of life, I just got more and more interested in it all,
Mm-hmm.
how everything all started to link together. And because most things are circular within sacred geometry, then how one culture and one religion would like blend in with another, and how they sort of create this oneness, which I
Mm-hmm.
know has, at the moment, everything's very fragmented. Everyone's very insular in some ways, and I feel that there's something missing. There's a sort of deeper missing, but it's hard to quantify into words. It's sort of a feeling.
It is. It is. I can appreciate that because uh really when we're here on a spiritual level having our own individual experience, we're not really um alone. You may feel like it because you've got this, you know, this body, this temple that you walk around in, but everybody's doing that. So everybody's walking around separately. And I think that, you know, maybe as you age or maybe as you are a seeker, you realize, hey, we're connected here. We're not separate. And we're not separate from anything in the universe, which is what I think is fascinating about sacred geometry. It's almost proof.
Mm. I would go along with in some ways. Yeah, I mean, I always like the idea that we're all made of stardust. If you think about, if you discount sort of evolution, but you look at like the Big Bang and how the way the sacred geometry builds up, like I was talking about the seed of life, etc. And it goes all the way back to like the Big Bang, imagine, the
Hmm.
point that becomes the circle, becomes unit, which then expands outwards. And then, you know, we're all made of the same stuff. We all go back to that one point. If you
Uh-huh.
a believer in the Big Bang, which some people are, some people aren't. Again, it's one of those things, isn't it? That we all have to come from somewhere, and we all go somewhere. We're all on a journey. I was looking at it as a journey, so that's
Yeah.
why I think with my art, the transitions, it's the journey. It's to take it from this stage to this stage to evolution. You know, the transcendentalness of it
Hmm.
fascinates me.
It's just wonderful, and your work is so beautiful. Um,
Well, thank you.
I am interested in what kind of products or services do you offer? Are you um,
Okay, so I have a website, natureflowers.com, which I mentioned earlier, I think, and
yep.
I
Well,
offer art prints.
and prints, yes, I will post the
Yeah.
natureofflowers.com. Look at that.
So
Yep.
we have
It's a
like
beautiful,
flowers,
beautiful. Yeah, I'll
and I
have the
isolate
link.
the flower into like a black background. Um, I also do t-shirts and tank tops and hoodies that go with those, if it's
Hmm.
cold or warmer. And the greetings cards, as you mentioned before, and I showed you there. So it's quite a small
Beautiful.
range of products. And yeah, I'm going to be doing some Christmas markets in England and
Oh, great.
get out and
Yeah.
about and do stuff like that, which would be really good. Um, I also have a YouTube channel where I do lots of Photoshop tutorials, which
Oh,
is
great.
Nature Flowers on Quentin Carpenter Nature Flowers on YouTube, which is a
Excellent.
link to from my website. And if you want to learn about how to make some of these sacred geometry shapes using computers, I talk through that on some YouTube tutorials on the channel, which is
Oh, I can't
great.
wait to check that out myself. That's awesome. Um, so uh, I really want to thank you for your time today, Quentin. And for those of you that want to actually see the interview, you can go to YouTube, Quentin Carpenter. We'll also post it on the U equals me YouTube channel. And if you can log on there, you can see all the beautiful things that Quentin is showing
Mm.
us. So in conclusion, um, Quentin, I, I would say that sacred geometry really has a huge impact on the world around us, especially in nature. By studying the principles, I think we can gain a deeper appreciation for the complexity of the universe and how we fit into it.
I would agree totally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is such a deep topic to get involved in, and if you're not familiar with it at all, I would highly recommend a quick Google look at some of the sort of introductory stuff. There's some really lovely like videos out there that will talk you through from whichever level you're entering it at. And it's eye-opening in so many ways if you're not familiar with the sort of patterns, etc. But you will be, they're familiar.
Yeah, this
You
is a
sort of,
good beginning. This is a good start. This is a wonderful conversation for people to start thinking about it. Thank you for that. Um, you can, but before I let you go, Quentin, I'm curious about this bonfire. Tell me about
oh
the
yeah,
bonfires.
so you're probably familiar with a guy called Guy Fawkes in England. Were you familiar with him?
No.
So Guy Fawkes was this kind of rebel figure that decided he didn't like the way Parliament was going. So he decided to get some gunpowder and put it under the Houses of Parliament in London and blow it up with all the MPs in situ. It's kind of like a sort of terrorist back in the day, if you like. But he was thwarted at the last second from killing all the MPs and was in turn arrested and then obviously, dealt with according to the time, and i.e. killed. And he was so every year in England there's a tradition where you get a guy and you parade him around the streets and then you put him on a bonfire and you would burn him to celebrate the fact he didn't blow up Parliament. And there's two sides to whether you think it's a good thing that he didn't blow it up or it's a bad thing he didn't blow it up, whether Parliament was good, etc. There's like a whole history of it. But essentially, every year on November the 5th, which is when it happened in England, everyone goes crazy, bonfire works everywhere. It's a huge tradition. But particularly where we live is a town called Battle, which is near Hastings, which is famous for the Battle of Hastings, you may be familiar with.
Yeah.
That's a whole other story. But basically, the bonfire, the powder was made that Guy Fawkes put in his barrels to blow up Parliament in Battle, in the powder mills that Battle is famous for. So hence why in this part of Sussex, they go absolutely crazy, have these huge bombs. Everyone's got a society, people get dressed up. They march through the street with flaming torches and a big fire. And it's a huge, huge tradition all over the place. And
I
Battle
had
particularly
I
is the
had
sort of
no
epicenter.
idea.
Yeah, it's huge.
I had no idea. And when you texted and said just got back from the bonfire, I'm like, oh, bonfire, that's nice. And then I
Yeah.
looked it up and I'm like, oh, holy cow. Had no
Yeah, it's a whole
idea.
other world. Yeah,
Yeah, that's very
it's huge.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, Quentin, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you taking the time to explain um, some of these shapes and symbols for us. And also, we'll put a link in the show notes too of the shapes that you did. You want to show us some of those shapes, or did we get
I
that?
will. I'll try. If I get the
Can you
screen
do a
recording,
screen share? I'd love to see that. And while you're doing that, I just want to say that
I think you
um,
need to.
do I
It
need
says
to do
host
some?
disabled. I think you need to enable it.
I thought I did that. Share notes options.
It
Oh,
says host
yeah, I'm sorry.
disabled.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I checked that last night. Let's see if that works.
Uh,
See if we can get it there. I think share whiteboard options. It's not a whiteboard, is it?
no, try it one more time.
It
It's
says
doing
all
something.
participants. Yeah, it may take a few minutes here. We'll see if we can get it up. Um, see if that can happen. But you can support Quentin's work at natureoflowers.com to purchase artwork, greeting cards, and logo wear. It's not really logo wear, but his artwork. And you can shop our logo wear at the U Equals Me Foundation at uequalsme.org. You can also download a complimentary ebook we have, Wisdom Along the Way, at uequalsme.org as well. So that's great. Did we find it?
I have
Am
no
I,
idea.
huh? Is it
If I
coming?
can't get the screen share to work, I thought I'd do it this one. If it will work.
We'll try this, and if we can't get it up on the screen right now, Quentin, I'll make sure that we have it in the show notes so people can see it. Oh,
Oh, it's kind of got the reflection of
yeah, it does have a little
the
bit of a
screen.
reflection. Yeah. Wow.
Right.
Oh, that's
Hopefully,
your
yeah. You
that's
see,
your
there's the pizza.
oh, oh yeah, you can see it moving.
So transition into the triquester now,
Yes. Oh, wow.
and you can see the interconnectedness of the shapes.
Uh-huh.
And this in turn will transition into this is the seed of life I was talking about. So if you see the 6 circles around the edges, they're
Yes.
the ones that represent the days of the week and the creation. And then the center one is the Sunday, etc. This is the flower of life that's coming up
Mm-hmm.
next.
Okay. Each one is mathematically perfect.
Mm. And these are all made on within Photoshop that I generate the imagery.
Okay.
And this
We're
is the
gonna.
fruit of life. And you'll see that there are 13 circles will appear, and they cause create the framework for what I was talking about with the Metatron's cube, which is appearing now,
Mm-hmm.
and how that will then link into the platonic solids, which I haven't put on this transition, to be fair. And then this will transition into a very famous called a Merkaba, which is a pyramid
Yeah.
within a pyramid creating a star. And we have the vector equilibrium symbol, which is a lot of structures. In the middle of that, you'll see the Star of David, which then, this is very famous within the Tree of Life, which lots of some cultures really revere. And then you've got the ancient Egyptian
Mm.
Ankh symbol,
Yeah.
which some
Yes.
people may be familiar with and how that relates, which then in turn forms into the pentagon, which is fascinating in terms of like your mathematics and how all the different golden ratios within a pyramid, within the stars of that.
Look at
This is the
that. Yeah.
Shryantra, which again is an awful lot of triangles interlocking and has many significances to the cultures it
Uh-huh.
represents. Then looking at that transitioning into the Fibonacci spirals, like a sort of galaxy vibe.
Wow.
And then another symbol I haven't really talked about today is the torus, which is kind of like the universe as a sort of imagining a sort of donut kind of shape inside. And then that leads nicely into the golden rectangle and the Fibonacci spiral to end that transition with.
Wow.
So I've uploaded that this morning onto my YouTube channel, so
Okay,
you
great.
can look at it. And I didn't have sound, so you can have a chance to sort of really think about what happens in it.
Yeah.
But quite
Well,
often I'll put a sort of meditative song with some of my transitions.
that's beautiful. Thanks for showing us. That's the
Yeah, I'm sorry the
transitions
screen
are.
share wasn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. My that could be my that could have been my on my
Yeah,
end. I thought
yeah,
I opened it up, but we'll find you on YouTube. We will post all
yeah.
of your information in the show notes, and you can find
Thank
us
you.
on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. So thanks so much for listening today. Go in peace and bring in light. Thank you. Stop recording. Thank you so much. Let's see here. Stop recording. Let me blow this up now. There we go. Trying to get it. Hey, finally, there we go. Okay, so stop recording.